Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Indian AvGeek. This is episode 66 and my name is Vishal Mehra. If you're joining us for the first time today, I gently suggest you go back and listen to episode 65 because what you're about to hear is part 2 of one of the most substantive conversations this show has ever hosted. Thomas Jaeger of ch-aviation and Addison Schonland of AirInsight Group are back, and we are picking up right where we left off. In our last episode, we discussed the premiumization of the LCC and the strategic earthquake of Willie Walsh joining Indigo. But today, we are moving from the boardroom to the hangar and the balance sheet. This is part 2, and in many ways, it is the harder conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome again to both of you. Second time in 3 days. I can get used to this, but I'm unsure about you guys. Let's start with you, Addison. If you were a CEO of a mid-sized airline today and you needed 50 narrow bodies for 2028 delivery, a couple of years down the line, would you take the risk on a Boeing delivery slot, or would you be willing to pay a premium for a secondary market Airbus lease? Which is the bigger risk, Boeing's quality or Airbus's backlog?
That's an interesting question. I think that we can expect the Boeing backlog to improve because the MAX 10 and the MAX 7 will almost certainly be certified the next 12 to 18 months. I think that's a fair bet. When that happens, the MAX 7, I'm not so sure about its future, but the MAX 10 will be coming off the Everett line, brand new line. They're gonna fly those things off the factory floor as fast as they can. I'm thinking it's probably 5 to 8 certainly to start off with per month, which would be phenomenal performance. But Boeing is showing, or even this year and all of last year, they are capable of amazing things. The talent pool at the Renton factory is deep and strong. Airbus has, of course, multiple FALs, so they can ramp it up carefully. So if I were an airline, starting an airline or running an airline network right now, the first constraint would be, what are my pilots trained to fly? Airbus or Boeing? They are not interchangeable.
Yeah, of course. But let alone the pilot question. I'm just looking at you for between the 320 and the 737. What's going to be your choice?
It's not a choice that works that's so obvious. You're saying that if everything else is equal, I have to bet on which OEM to go on? Is that it?
Yes.
I wouldn't bet on the OEM. I'd go to the leasing market and see what I can find. Because there's no flexibility in anybody in this market right now. No one has the flexibility. It's not such an easy question.
Air India is integrating everything from A320s to 737s to A350s and 777s. Historically, mixed fleets are an economic nightmare. Now, I want to understand from you, Addison, is the new Air India big enough to ignore the complexity tax? Or will this fleet diversity eventually become a problem for them? I am, of course, well versed with the fact that one of their lead investors, Singapore Airlines, also deploys a mixed fleet, and maybe some of that thinking comes from there. But what do you think?
A fleet planner once told me that when you get to 50 planes, it doesn't matter. You've got a big enough critical mass. So if you're Air India Express and you're at 50, you're going towards, not necessarily yet, but you're going to be at 50 maxes, that's fine. What will happen is that there will be a cross-pollination, probably across the pilot pool, as you know, because pilot unions are what they are. Seniority what it is. And let's say I'm a junior on the max, but I can get a senior role on the 320. And I can get trained for that and take me, let's say, a month or whatever to get a senior to go from first officer to captain on a 320. I'm going to go where the money is. So once Air India has a big enough silo of 320s and maxes, what you'll see is those pilot groups will mix and match as needed. The airline will have the right spares for both silos of fleet, and the sub fleets don't become an issue once you probably hit 50 or thereabouts. The system finds its new rhythm, so to speak.
With the 777X delivery pushed to 2027 and the A350 securing major wins, has Boeing lost the big twin market for a decade? Or is the 777-9's massive capacity still the only real answer for the ultra hub carriers, Addison? What do you think?
I think that's actually, you touch on a very, very interesting point. The 777-9, its closest competitor is the 350-1000, right? And the 350-1000 has not had as much market attraction as the 350-900. The 350-900 is a sweet plane. I've flown it often. I've flown the 1000 once. And what's interesting to see is that after the 380, a lot of people, Lufthansa with the 747 and the 380, they've kind of brought back their 380s because they're bought and paid for, so to speak. The 747s, they're basically running them out. Even the Dash 8s at at Lufthansa are now being sold to the US Air Force. So you would think that the 777-9 is not, well, Tim Clark has been quite vocal about the frustration. But at the same time, Tim Clark didn't buy a 350-1000, did he? So I think that when we get to VLAs, very large airplanes, the market is seen the 747, seen the 380, seen the risks involved at that size, and takes a very more deliberate approach. Delta, for example, took a long time with the 350-900 before they decided to go for the 1000. Then you see someone new like Starlux going for the 1000 right away. So that's fascinating. But then, of course, they're rolling the dice differently. So on the one hand, you would say, the 777-9 delay has been a disappointment. Yes, it's been frustrating for Boeing for sure, and for their customers for sure. But at the same time, if this was such a crisis and if this was so bad, they didn't go for the alternative anywhere near the rush and the way that the pent-up demand would indicate. So I would say it's still an open question.
Back with you, Thomas. You've tracked the shift towards premium cabins and densification as airlines like Indigo add stretch and Legacy simplify. How much of these record profits are actually just ancillary revenue masking a decline in core ticket profitability? If we stripped away, the convenience fees and baggage charges and this and that, would the global airline industry even be profitable today?
Well, I think it would be possible that it is still profitable because we are in a really good, or we have been in a really good revenue environment for quite some time. But it will probably be marginally profitable as opposed to significantly more profitable than it has been for the last couple of years. But I mean, it always depends a bit region by region. So if you look at the North American market, I think without premium demand and without all of the ancillary fees and credit card revenues and whatever, the airlines would all be loss-making. But they essentially calibrated the business model around all of that by now, and it's fairly stable. And I think the situation that you see in India is that it's still early days of experimenting with different cabin configurations. You have even some of the low-cost carriers like Air India Express that obviously has premium cabins, not by choice because they took the aircraft that were configured like that. But I think it's a bit more early days there to say that in the domestic Indian market, the premium cabins will make a massive difference. But they certainly make a big difference on all of the metro routes where you have people that are willing to spend significantly more for premium seating. But yeah, I mean, overall, the airline industry has been moving from being ticket revenue only plus cargo, etc., to being very unbundled. And even major network carriers. I mean, if you look at the big three carriers in the Gulf that fly a lot from and to the Indian market, they have unbundled a lot. So I mean, you can buy a basic fare with Etihad. I don't know how they call it. And essentially, if you want to bring a bag later, you're going to pay 150, 200 euros for that bag. So they have unbundled to the extent that is sometimes more extreme than it is with low-cost carriers. And it's the same now that you see unbundling happening in premium classes where they are selling business class tickets without lounge access and without this and without that. So I think what we are generally moving towards as an industry is that I would still call it an idea, because I think we are still quite far away of fully personalizing all of the offers. And I mean, that is what IATA is moving towards as well, with their vision of offer and order management, that essentially you can have hyper personalized offers for individual travelers. And there is almost no, I mean, I don't know if you know of an airline where this would apply. There is almost no airline anymore that will not offer you multiple products in the booking flow, where they're going to offer you a basic fare, a value fare, something more premium, and they hope that you pick the one in the middle. So I think that's generally where we're heading. It obviously makes it more difficult and more complex from an IT perspective. It makes it more difficult, more complex from a consumer perspective to pick what you actually want.
I mean, Lufthansa has 7 sorts of different business class seats now on
Yes,
Allegris. I mean,
yes.
it's crazy.
Well, I mean, it's also difficult from a customer expectation perspective, because obviously, if you paid 600 euros more to have a specific type of seat that you want to have, and then that seat becomes inoperable for some technical reasons, and you have to get downgraded to another seat, it is difficult to manage expectations with that. I mean, you see that already with a lot of other carriers, but Lufthansa is in a particularly bad spot from that perspective, that you have so many different business class products flying side by side in different parts of the fleets and subfleets, that the likelihood that you pay for something that you afterwards don't get is a problem. So
It's crazy indeed. ITA has predicted a record profit of $41 billion in 2026. Though I must say, with the recent disruptions in Middle East, that number might need a little bit of a relook. Yet, the net margin remains a razor thin 3.9%. And again, that margin might also need a relook. We are seeing softening fares, and we will see some more of that if and when the Middle East carriers come back to the market. There's, of course, continuous cost pressure in terms of labor and fuel. Is 2026 the last hurrah before a cooling global economy and the massive debt loads from 2020 to 2024 era finally force a major industry correction, or a wave of bankruptcies?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the industry is going to do what it's always done. And in this industry, you're always one crisis away from the next problem. If it's not SARS, it's a pandemic. If it's not that, then it's a fuel crisis. And if it's not that, it's the Middle East. If it's not that, it's Taiwan. If it's not that, it's something else. There's always something. This is not a business for the people with a weak stomach. If your nervous system cannot take it, you should go and do something else, because this is literally, like I said early on, the top people, I don't know if they ever can sleep, because it's terrifying. You've got OCCs at all the airlines is operating centers that are running 24/7, watching every single airplane everywhere all the time, because there are exogenous factors that impact this industry, from the weather to everything else. So I think that this industry has proven its resilience. It shows that GDP is the ultimate guide as to what's going to happen. And yes, we have political craziness left and right. We have all kinds of stuff going on, and people keep flying, because you know what? We live in a time where, why would you, if you want to get out there and do something, you've got to go to the airport and jump on a plane and do what you need to do. And it's just a risk. When you get out of bed in the morning, it's a risk. And when you can lie down at night and you haven't got hurt all day, you got to say, yeah, that was a win. So yeah, I think that, I don't want to get caught up in the madness of, we've got another thing. It's like that. It just is like that. Put your head down, go back to do what you do, give it your best shot. That's it.
That's it. I have a related question, Addison. Did the OEMs fly too close to the sun with the GTF and the LEAP? We're seeing unplanned removals, not just for powder metal issues, but for HPT blades and core vibrations. Is the industry's push for 15-20% fuel efficiency gains fundamentally incompatible with the time on wing reliability that LCCs built their business models on?
Well, firstly, let's go back a few years. The history of the GTF starts with the Superfan and the 340. Goes back a long way. And Pratt & Whitney tried to roll the dice with the Superfan, and then they let Airbus down because they decided not to do the engine. And suddenly the 340 had to go with the CFM56. Turns out, the CFM56 is the baseline benchmark for reliability, the most reliable airplane engine ever made. Boeing and Airbus, accounting for 95% of deliveries in the world, needed to do something to take it to the next level. And they needed to do something clever. And Airbus had to respond because Bombardier came out with a C series. And the C series was built around the GTF. And the GTF was Pratt & Whitney's way to try and get back into the single aisle engine business, because they really got their fingers burned by doing what they did before. And they were king of the hill when they were powering the 737-200s. So you again, it's tectonic plate shifting. It's slow and quiet, but the impact goes on for a long time. It's like an earthquake. And so Pratt & Whitney was going to win this any way they could. So what happens is they go into the C series. It turns out that the economics look brilliant. The engine is superbly quiet. It's extremely fuel efficient, much more fuel efficient than what they were thinking. The data that we see it's 20%, not 16%, and sometimes even better than that. If you're flying like an LCC with a lot of seats, the ASMs per gallon are fantastic. I think that Frontier is close to 120 ASMs per gallon. It's phenomenal fuel performance, phenomenal. So obviously CFM and GE and Safran are not going to look at this and say, well, forget about it, we're not going to do anything. They are going to do something. So what did they do? They didn't go for a geared solution. They added some more complexity to the CFM56, because why would you make it something else? You've got the best engine in the world already. Why would you mess with it? So you tweak it. And both companies, there was more pressure, there was more heat. They got more energy out of a liter of fuel. They did brilliantly, but they did it incrementally. Pratt took a different turn, and they were not incremental. Everybody worried about the fan. It turns out it was never the fan that was the problem. In fact, it was interesting. I went to Pratt & Whitney after they put the GTF on the 340 600 as the test bed, and they showed me the stripped down engine. And they said, look at the gear. What do you see about the gear? And I said, look, I'm not an engineer. What am I looking for? So the guy said to me, do you see any scratches or on the gear teeth? Do you see any wear signs? I said, no. He said, let me tell you something. Airbus was going to break this engine any way they could. They were going to try and break this gear. and they couldn't break it. So the gear is not the thing we're worried about. What the problem is with these new engines is they're much heavier. They're big. If you see the front of an old model 320 and a new model like a CO versus a Neo, it's amazing how big the engines are, right? So they're much heavier. The problem is heavy is bad. So they had to try and figure out a way, how do we get some of the weight out? So the GTF, they made thinner parts, they tried to find ways to save weight. Turns out that wasn't a good idea, but you cannot blame them for trying. CFM tried to do something to take the weight out. Okay, guess what? Parts wore out quicker than anybody expected. But what was cool is that both engine companies provided vastly better fuel efficiency, so they can cut back on that efficiency now and say, well, you know what? We're going to make the engines more durable and we'll lose a little bit of fuel burn. So we'll go from 20 to 18, maybe 20% to 18%, but we're still better than we thought, and they're going to make it reliable. Commercial aviation is a series, the history of commercial aviation is a series of incremental steps. They push hard and they have to come back a little bit, and they push hard and they come back a little bit. And that's just the nature of the industry. So I think it's fantastic. We live at a phenomenally interesting time for those of us interested in aviation, because what is going to happen now? Look at the hybrid engines that we're looking at. They're going to work in the regional market first because you're flying with batteries, and battery weight doesn't decrease with the range of the plane, whereas fossil fuel does, even SAF. The plane gets lighter the longer it flies. But that's fascinating to see that happening. And then, of course, at the single arm, what do we do next? Open rotor. What do we do next? What's the next thing? Because you know what? We need to go another double-digit jump for the next generation in the 30s, 2030, mid-2030s. And what do you see? CFM they'll tweak the LEAP. They keep coming up with new versions, PIPs. Same thing with Pratt & Whitney. They're coming with PIPs. They keep making it better. So everybody likes to be clever and say, well, they could have done differently. They could have done better. You didn't have the information at Pratt & Whitney or CFM at the time that you made the first round decisions. You had to roll the dice. You took the best bet that you could with the information you had. You didn't know how it was going to work out in service. And then you get the in-service response, and it's a standard thing with all engines. They keep having PIPs, performance improvement packages. They keep having them. So I think that how this has worked out is fine.
We're seeing engine shop visit turnarounds balloon from 60 days to over 300 days for the GTF. From your data at ch-aviation, how many ghost fleets do we currently have globally? And is there any evidence that the MRO capacity can actually catch up by 2027? Or are we looking at a longer period structural deficit?
Just looking at some data that I pulled out mid of last month, and the trend is actually somewhat worrying, because at the beginning of 24 there were 316 GTF aircraft that have not flown for an entire month, and that ballooned up to 513 at the beginning of 25. And it was about 543 at the end of 25. So the curve is flattening, but we're still not at the peak. So the number of aircraft that are grounded because of these GTF issues is still growing rather than getting smaller. And I mean, in Q4 25, there were 543 aircraft that were on the ground versus 1,322 flying, which shows you that it's a pretty bad ratio. So yes, there's a lot of MRO capacity being brought online, but you also have to look at all of this from a long-term perspective. So obviously, if you build up too much MRO capacity right now, then once we are over that peak, there might be excess capacity. Aviation is going to continue to grow, but if you cannot now just double the engine production. I mean, if you would do that, you would afterwards have an issue that you built up too much capacity. So I think it's going to take quite some time. And as I said, we got up from like 300-ish aircraft 2 years ago to 550-ish now that are on the ground. So getting that down to 10% of that number is going to take time. And I would assume that it's going to take longer than 27, but it's anyone's guess when this will all calibrate itself again. But obviously, what you see in the industry now is that people are questioning whether or not it makes sense to fly older aircraft significantly longer than the original plan was, not just because you have a business case now that kind of looks different than it looked like on paper when you ordered these aircraft, because the engine maintenance costs and all of these downtimes obviously add a significant cost to the new generation aircraft. Older aircraft with that are less fuel efficient and that have high maintenance costs is still fairly attractive compared to the uncertainty that you have from these newer generation aircraft.
So I was about to ask you exactly that, Thomas. At what point does the maintenance cost of a slightly older A320 classic engine option surpass the fuel savings benefit of a grounded Neo?
I am not an engine maintenance expert, but I mean, what I guess the key cliff is all the time is when an aircraft is going to get super close to another heavy check where you're asking yourself if that's really still required and if it makes sense to still go through that. But the balance has definitely shifted, and you're now seeing carriers that typically had a fleet strategy where they would only take in new aircraft directly from manufacturers to replace older aircraft they had in their fleet, now suddenly taking in secondhand A320 CEOs, 737-800s. So you have a fairly distorted market, and that distorted market obviously also doesn't help the economics of the older aircraft, because if you want to lease an old A320 CEO now that has enough time left until the next heavy maintenance check, you're paying significantly higher lease rates than you would have paid some years ago for that aircraft. So you have high lease rates on an old aircraft, plus higher maintenance costs, plus higher fuel burn, compared to a new generation aircraft that obviously is still more expensive from a lease perspective, but has lower fuel burn, but then these reliability issues. So the entire business case is just very different now than it used to be, and no one knows how long this is going to last. So I mean, eventually the problem will get resolved, and then these older generation aircraft are going to be worth significantly less overnight.
Addison, let's talk about the next gen aircraft engines. Boom's Symphony engine is an ambitious move for a startup. Historically, every supersonic failure was an engine failure, economic or technical. Is the business case for Overture based on a realistic volume of premium travelers, or is it a vanity project for a handful of boutique routes, and for airlines like United to get some future focused PR?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask about Boom. Okay, so I have to be careful here because I'm an industry booster by nature. I love new ideas and I love new technologies. I find it fascinating. So technologically speaking, very interesting. The fact that Boom couldn't get the engine makers, not one engine maker, to offer them an engine should tell us a story. Because no engine maker looked at that program and said, oh boy, I can make money here. I'm not going to get, basically, all of them looked at it and said, I'm not going to get a return on investment because the market's too small. Now, that's not me rolling the dice here, it's them. So that's the first thing. So if that's the case, Boom has to go and make its own engine. Well, now all of a sudden, you're no longer in the airplane business, you're also in the engine business. Well, to try and de-risk that, we're going to now try and make that engine also work as a power generation tool for data centers. Okay, so now not only do we have to make an engine, we also have to make an engine that's going to compete with Rolls-Royce, GE, and everybody else that makes ground-based generators to generate electricity. So now that's another risk. It's not you haven't de-risked at all, because you're now getting into the wrong kind of business. You're competing with well-established people in this business. Does that mean you have to discount your engine to get your motor, to your generator pack to get the business? Can you afford that? So, Vishal, I would have to say that I don't want to call it a vanity project, because I'm sure there are smart people that have got skin in the game that are saying this is going to be a good thing. To be brutally honest, I'm reluctant to make any kind of bet on this. I'm fascinated and I'm happy to sit and watch this thing, and I wish them success. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the market is big enough. I'm just not seeing it. At the same time, to give credit to where credit is due, the leadership at Boom have managed to get investors and customers. So to their credit, they've been able to be persuasive. I'm not going to say that I'm negative, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah, they have been brave, Blake Schkoll and his team. You're absolutely right. Best wishes to them. If they can crack this, it'll be terrific for the industry. I do realize you both have seen many paper aeroplanes come and go. If you had to bet on one technology, whether it's hydrogen or SAF or radical airframes, what Jet Zero is trying to do with the blended wing, where is your money going?
Ooh, Vishal, I'm not in the business of giving people financial advice. You're asking for a free to bet here. And I've been talking about rolling the dice a lot in this conversation. Okay, so I think we can agree that this is a fascinating time. And I would say that there's always going to be a cocktail of technologies that move us forward. It's never one thing. So I think that first, the number one thing is going to be the blended wing body. I think that, to me, is the most credible step forward. I think that's going to be a very effective thing. And the unfortunate thing is, well, let's start off with the positive. The fortunate thing is that there were 3 companies, all on the US West Coast, involved in doing this. One of them in Seattle has closed down. The one in San Diego and the one in Long Beach continue. So I think those 2 companies are onto something big. I'm sure that the Boeing, Airbus, Embraer groups are all looking at this very, very closely, because I think those 2 companies will end up in some silo at the duopoly if it works. So I think number one is blended wing body is the way forward. Number 2 is going to be engines, and the rise is fantastic technology, fantastic economic numbers, but it's an open fan. Interesting thing is that if you stuck an open fan on the back of a blended wing body, 2 things happen. Number 1, you've got the noisy part of the open fan way behind the passenger compartment. Number 2, those fans are operating inside of the winglets, which will reduce the noise. And number 3, if there was a fan blade comes loose, it's going to hit the tail of the plane where there's no passengers. So that's all good stuff. Will the rise be able to scale for a blended wing body? Don't know. Interesting to see when Boeing was looking at the X-66, they went with a GTF as a solution, not an open fan. Fascinating area. So blended wing body is number 1. Number 2 is going to be engines. We don't know quite how that's going to play out, but it's great to see that the big engine companies are pushing the envelope. Rolls-Royce's new engine, fascinating, got a gear very much like the GTF. I have a personal question, which I never get a straight answer to. And I love doing this to people at Pratt & Whitney. I'm saying to them, what I have said to them numerous times, at what stage do your lawyers ask Rolls-Royce for their patents to see how they compete with your patents on gears? They smile at me and say, we're not answering that question. You know, Pratt and Rolls-Royce, remember on the V2500, they had a lawsuit. So, you know, they've been down this road before. So I think, and then the third thing about fuels. So SAF is long on promise and short on availability. Hydrogen, long time to go before anything like that happens. I think we stay with fossil fuels for a long, long time. I think net zero is a joke, a bad joke. The people at IATA that first promised this at the IATA conference in Boston, they all promised this, you know, we're going to have net zero in 50 years. Not one person making this promise will be around in the industry to deliver on this promise. Their grandchildren have to deliver on this promise. It's a bad joke. There you are. I'm probably going to have less friends than I ever had before.
All right. Our final question, our finale for this fantastic chat that three of us have had. Thomas, I come to you for the final question. Blended wing designs like Jet Zero offer massive fuel savings. That's what they are aiming for. That's what they are claiming. But they require a total rethink of airport infra, right? In terms of gates, taxiways, evacuation exits, whatnot. Is the industry actually willing to spend billions of dollars on ground infra to accommodate a non-tube aircraft? What do you think?
I am both very excited about all of these designs, and I'm also very, you could either call me realistic or cynical about it. I mean, United has been very vocal about backing boom supersonic as well, and said that by 2029, if I'm not mistaken, there will be supersonic transatlantic flights. So the reality is that the likelihood that by the time the two of us retire, a significant number of aircraft will not come from what is now essentially A, B, C, and E, Airbus, Boeing, Comac, and Embraer, is rather small. So let's imagine Jet Zero is going to really deliver on what they promised that they would deliver. You would then have to get that aircraft certified, which, as we can see right now, is a significant challenge. If you see how much time it takes Airbus and Boeing and other established players to get their aircraft certified. Comac is probably still a couple of years away from getting EASA or FAA certification for the C919 that they're working towards now. So certification is one major hurdle. All of the capital that will be required to build up the assembly lines, the supply chains to establish a new aircraft manufacturer of such scale. So this is all possible, but it's only possible if you have billions to spend. And then, as you said, on top of that, you need to solve all of the architectural space, wingspan problems. I mean, there's a lot of airports that are very congested right now that are investing significant amounts of money into optimizing space, not necessarily on taxiways and runways, but just stands and making sure that they have enough stands at all times to manage all of the traffic that flows through them. So if you have an aircraft that is going to be significantly wider than anything that exists today, that's going to create massive infrastructure issues with where you're going to park these aircraft when they're on the ground. So I wish them all the best, and I hope it's going to work out. But you tell me if you disagree. But I don't see that by 2035 or 2040 there is going to be any other significant aircraft manufacturer that doesn't exist today.
Even on the United's boom bet, I think it's a very hands-off bet. I'm not sure how much United is actually investing or how much United has actually put down as an advance to boom to get those aircraft. I think it's more of a, just a thumbs up that boom can show to other airlines that look, I've got United on board. And for United to tell people and put out a fancy press release saying that, hey, look at us, we are thinking about the future of aviation. We've just signed up this guy, and but it's a very, I mean, it's almost a zero risk bet for United. So the odds are certainly against boom on Jet Zero. Yeah, my cynicism, like you were saying, is from the fact that how many airports in the world would be willing to invest in upgrading or changing their infra to accommodate a Jet Zero aircraft, right? Uh,
We have seen similar challenges before when the A380 entered operation, and all of the not all, but a lot of the airports had to make investments to accommodate operations of A380s. But obviously, it's a bit of a different ball game if you, I mean, the investments were not as significant as I assume that they would have to be for a Jet Zero aircraft.
exactly.
And you had, serious carriers signing up for this aircraft, and where you had some sort of reliable forecast on how many passengers that this aircraft would deliver to you and why it would be important that you build that infrastructure. I mean, I say some sort of reliability, because obviously the likes of Air France, Malaysia Airlines, Thai, China Southern operated A380s in the past. They no longer do. If they get closer to certification, if they get 250 orders from significant players in the industry, airports are going to start being very open to making investments. But I think that the likelihood that anyone is going to even bother thinking about it at the moment is zero, because why would you think about something that you, from an airport master planning perspective, assume is not going to happen?
And of course, the 380 had the might of Airbus behind it, right? You
Yes.
had thousands of other Airbus aircraft flying all around the world, and even those airports which made investments for 380 had so many other 320s and 340s and 330s, frequenting the airport. So, but with Jet Zero, it's a completely new ball game, new manufacturer. I mean, it's still a long time away. I think it's certainly something to keep an eye out on, and very, very interesting.
You have the same thing on the opposite end of the spectrum. All of these aircraft manufacturers that are announcing plans that they want to build electric turboprop aircraft. They're also all in a similar position, that they have never certified an aircraft before on propulsion that hasn't been certified before, and so on. This is going to take a lot longer than one expects. And then, just because a turboprop is 20% or be 27% more efficient than a traditional turboprop, doesn't mean that out of a sudden there is going to be 1,000 turboprops flying domestic flights in India, because it's still difficult to get people to pay that much for short haul flights. So it's the fundamentals of the industry don't change just because there is a new design idea.
With that, I just want to thank you guys, Addison and Thomas, for your time, for being so gracious, and for being so generous. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for having me.
These last two episodes have been fantastic, purely because of both of you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for your interest, and I wish you all the best.
And with that, we close the book, or rather this mic, on what has genuinely been one of my favorite conversations in the history of this show. Thomas, Addison, thank you. This is not Thomas Addison, Thomas and Addison. All right. Not just for your time across both episodes, but for the intellectual honesty you brought to every single question. And, if you think about this industry that can sometimes feel overmanaged in its messaging, this was so refreshing and frankly a little rare to have two people of your standing just call it as they see it. this coming Sunday, it is the turn of the Indian AvGeek episode number 23. And we will have the global CEO of VR Social, Toby Southgate, joining us on the show. Please be sure to follow AirInsight and ch-aviation on socials. As far as I am concerned, you will find me everywhere, including Blue Sky, as @Vishal1Mehra. Always happy to have your feedback. With that, keep your tray tables up and your seatbelts fastened. I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.